My entitled father makes my life a living nightmare after I drop out of college, mocking me and scolding me for not being the man that he wants me to be, while also forcing me to pay rent that I literally cannot afford. And after dealing with that for 6 months and finally finding a solution in getting out of his house, his final words to me were to say that I was a disappointment and a mistake. And I'm honestly so done with my father. Here's what happened. So for a bit of context, and by this time I was 19 years old, so it would be about 10 years ago this day, and sadly I dropped out of college within months of starting because of a variety of problems, mostly from depression and stress that wasn't helped by my mom trying to tell me what to do. My mom and dad were long divorced by this point, and I ended up moving to my dad's, who at the time had zero internet at the home. It was, in the words of my dad, punishment for me throwing away my one chance at being useful to this world. I then worked as a cashier at a restaurant chain in the nearby town. For reference, my dad lived and still lives out in the country. I would say things were rather uneventful, but he made sure that wouldn't be the case by being his usual entitled self. Some of these things were brief and usual, like him screaming at me for doing anything leisurely instead of working 24/7. You know, I simply couldn't do things like watching TV or going for a walk, or he would even belittle me for trying to start drawing as a hobby, while also calling me names in the process. Here's some of the extreme things he did in those 6 months that we lived together. One of the first things he did was shortly after I got my job. Things were going relatively well at the job, despite one woman who found me just as pathetic as my dad did. Thank God she wasn't in any management position, and that the manager and boss didn't like her behavior any more than I did, not to mention some customers calling me awful names for making an error on their order. However, as par for the course of a part-time job, even back then, I wasn't working much and I wasn't getting that much money. I did have a talk with my boss about the hours and about how someday she'll send me home early if there was no business, but she said it was something she had to do. When I told my dad he wasn't happy, he told me that I had to make her give me more hours, but I told her that if she can't, then she can't. He then suddenly punched the wall right next to me and had the glare on his face that I've come to recognize that things were gonna get violent. So now I was scared for my well-being. He told me that now that he got me scared, I'm willing to do whatever he wanted to keep myself safe. He then went on this huge rant about how real men get what they want by making promises to hurt people. He said that you have to hurt those who stand in your way, and you also have to hurt people that you don't like or people that hold you back. And that if I don't do that, then I'm not a man. Instead, I'm just a mistake. Although I didn't tell my manager what he did, I did tell her that he might go to her angry once he finds out that she has to send me home early if business is not working that day. She simply said that if he does so, or if he bruises me up, she will call the cops, and she even told him that directly. Well, as a result, I was punished with rent that I never even expected that cost most of my monthly amount of paychecks. Another thing that happened is that I almost passed away from his negligence. My dad is one of those country folk who heats up the house with a furnace. You know, those big cube-like iron things that are like a combination of a fireplace and a heater. Yeah, one of those things. Well, on this day, I had a night shift, and my dad was going to be out of the area until very late due to work. So my grandfather, his dad, offered to take me to and from work. I was enjoying the day to myself, doing what I wanted, watching whatever was on TV that caught my eye, drawing or at least attempting to draw some doodles, playing some video games, etc. By the time it got to the afternoon, I found that I was oddly sleepy. I decided to lay on the bed and close my eyes for an hour or two, and it was just enough time to get a bit more energy in me for a potentially busy night, but also so that I'll have plenty of time to get ready. So I just closed my eyes to go to sleep, but I was suddenly shaken awake by my grandfather, who looked absolutely relieved that I was conscious. In my blurry state, I heard an alarm going off, and he had me grab my work clothes and my phone and took me to his house nearby to help me get my head clear before changing and going to work. What had happened was the furnace was not properly cared for, and there was a lot of gunk blocking the pipe leading outside, and the house was slowly but steadily filling with carbon monoxide. It didn't take long to get better once I was able to breathe clean air, and although I was feeling a bit woozy, I managed to work as much as I could. Now, it wasn't a long shift, maybe about 3 to 4 hours, and my grandma was the one who picked me up. She said my dad got home not too long ago, and they managed to clear the carbon monoxide of the home pretty quickly, and my grandpa was scolding my dad like crazy. Sure enough, when I got home, my grandfather was angry at my dad, and to my surprise, his sister was also there, scolding him as well. However, he was not once remorseful over what had happened. He was annoyed that they were getting on his case even when they tried to hammer in the fact that there was a chance that I could have passed away. He simply said, "Well, he didn't, so stop making this such a big deal." I did thankfully move out of his place very quickly. It was a few months after the carbon monoxide incident. My job unfortunately burned to the ground from an electrical fire, and I had the choice to either carpool to the next nearest location about 40 minutes away or just find a different job. So you know what? I chose the latter, and my grandma on my mom's side offered to move me to her town as there was far more job opportunities there than where I was currently living at. Now, of course, my dad was not happy about that. He went to my bank account, and yes, he did the usual entitled parent thing of having the bank account as a joint account so he could get in without my permission, and he took out a huge chunk of my money. His excuse was to claim that this was the rest of the year's rent. My grandma tried to find a legal way to get the money back, but since it was a joint account, we were told that he technically didn't break any law. And while I was packing up to move, my dad constantly told me how much of a disappointment I am, how I'm the reason my parents got a divorce, how I deserved all the awful treatment that I got, and that nobody likes or tolerates me. Now, my grandma did put him in his place, but that just escalated to where he told me that he wishes I was never born, although I regret not talking to my grandma about cutting him off then. I mean, I had no idea back then that you could do such a thing, but that was the beginning of me slowly going no contact with him to eventually only talking to him whenever I had to. Wow, your father sounds awful. Seriously, I can't imagine putting up with that for 6 months. That honestly must have been insane living through that every single day and dealing with his awful attitude and his condescending demeanor. First of all, his definitions of like, oh, you gotta be violent if you want to be a man. If you want people to respect you, you've gotta hurt them and threaten them. Like, dude, what are you talking about? This guy literally punched a wall because you got cut hours at your part-time job. Like, seriously, don't you think we're overreacting just a little bit? And then after you tell him, look, there's nothing I could do about it, he says, oh, I'm gonna go down there and I'm gonna do something about it. Like, buddy, what are you doing? Are you trying to get me fired? It's either that or you're seriously trying to go to jail. And both options seem pretty stupid right about now. It's also super brutal about the banking situation because joint accounts are like the first thing that entitled parents go to when they're like, oh cool, here's some free cash. Like, seriously, there's no good excuse for that. Like, that was your money. This guy didn't need rent money. He literally just took a big chunk of your money just to be a jerk. And that is honestly so unfortunate because you did not deserve that. It is really cool though to see your grandfather and your grandmother basically have your back. Like, they straight away saw that this guy sucks and that he's not a good father. It's just so unfair